It's a quiet Friday night at Stanford University. Mary and her best friend Anita are trying to hitch a ride from the campus. Yellow Ford Galaxy pulls in front of them. Inside, there is a very tall man with a funny-looking mustache and round glasses. He introduces himself as Ed and offers a ride to the girls. At first, the girls are somewhat hesitant due to sheer size of this man. But since there is two of them, they decide to take him up on the offer. After driving for a little while, they discover that Ed is indeed a gentle giant. Suddenly, Ed drives off the highway to a lonely dirt road. Mary did not really pay attention to this sudden change in the direction. Honestly, why should she? She was done with a week of heavy studying. It was a weekend and she was going to relax. Even when Ed stopped the car, it did not strike Mary as odd. She assumed that Ed was heading off to the toilet. But then all of a sudden, a light reflected into her eyes from something shiny in Ed's hands. It took her a moment or two to realize that Ed was holding a big shiny knife. Was this really happening, or was this some sort of a sick joke? It didn't seem possible. Ed was calm and quiet. He really couldn't hurt a fly, or could he? But then she saw something behind those glasses. There was something more there, something dark. Mary's body froze in complete shock as she saw that Ed took Anita and locked her in the trunk of his car. She couldn't move even when Ed put handcuffs on her hands and bag over her head. Her body was completely frozen in fear. Second later, she felt the world slipping away. Everything was turning to darkness. There was just one thought on Mary's mind. This is it. This is how I die. No, I refuse, Mary suddenly thought. Mary suddenly jerked and caught Ed by surprise. Her fight or flight instinct kicked in. She was not going down without a fight. While Ed was trying to recover and get a grip on her once more, Mary kicked and fought with all her might. She bit through the plastic bag on her head and gasped for a breath. She felt sweet, fresh air flowing to her lungs. She felt power returning to her body. She was going to make it. Then suddenly cold steel, cold as ice, plunged into her throat. As that final breath made it to her lungs, her world turned to black. California seemed as a distant memory as Ed settled into his new life in Montana. Well, life may be a bit of a stretch. Ed wasn't really living, he was surviving. Ever since his parents divorced last year, 10-year-old Ed was in constant fear of his mother. In her eyes, Ed was guilty for everything. No matter what happened, she blamed Ed. He could not escape her wrath. She was always drunk and always angry with him. And now things have escalated. His mother claims that he is danger to his sisters. She forces him to live in a dark basement like an animal. Why? Because he cut off a head of a stupid doll? Ridiculous. Ed kept repeating to himself. It was clearly just a game. Feeling rejected and abandoned by his mother, Ed turned to one thing he had, to the darkness of the basement. Instead of crumbling away in darkness, he flourished. Darkness filled the hole in his heart. He became one with the darkness. He will no longer be afraid. He will be the one who sows the fear. This woke many dark and strange fantasies in Ed's head. His mother was the villain of his world, and he would see to her end. Dark fantasies aside, Ed was still only a 10-year-old child. He was not a killer. He was a child in desperate need of a parental figure, but there was none. Without anyone to save him from this dark void of his heart, Ed lurched headfirst into the darkness. He started small, with family cats. One, he buried alive, but second, Second one he savagely slaughtered with knife. This was too much for his mother, who was at this point being consumed by alcohol, so she just threw him away, like a piece of trash. She sent him away to live with his grandparents. Unfortunately, Ed did not find solace at his grandparents' house either. He was already damaged and broken. He frequently got into arguments with them. His detachment from humanity and murderous rage kept building inside of him, all the way until it reached a boiling point. After a very heated argument with his grandmother, Ed finally snapped. He grabbed a gun, and at a point-blank range, he shot her. In the same moment that she died, so did the final parts of Ed's soul and humanity. Hours later, when his grandfather returned home, Ed shot him as well. Ed did not care anymore. He called his mother and told her calmly what he did. He willingly gave himself to the authorities. Since Ed was only 15 years old at the moment, he couldn't be tried as an adult, therefore he was handed over to California youth authorities. There, Ed undertook many different psychological tests, and it was determined he suffers from paranoid schizophrenia. While there, doctors noticed that Ed was very bright and fast, so they gave him an IQ test. The results left them completely speechless, as Ed was a certified genius with an impressive IQ of 145. For his crimes, Ed was sent to a maximum security facility for mentally ill convicts. While there, Ed appeared to be completely reformed. Psychiatrists there described him as a model prisoner. He was even trained by psychiatrists to help administer psychiatric tests to other inmates. 5 years later, Ed was released from the hospital with a bright future ahead of him. However, Ed had nowhere to go. He had no one to turn to but his mother. He was forced to once again live with her, where the cycle of belittlement and abuse started right where it stopped all those years ago. He tried to find escape in his work, but no matter what, he could not find a steady job. He tried to become a state trooper, but due to his past, he was rejected. Police officers that met him during his application to become a state trooper ended up becoming good friends with Ed. They let him borrow their gun and handcuffs. 2 years after being released from prison, Ed was hit by a car and was unable to work, forcing him to spend more time at home with his mother. His murderous desires began to come to surface once again. Same dark thoughts and fantasies came back, once again completely taking over his mind. He tried to calm his demons, but there was no escape this time. Those dark thoughts morphed into homicidal sexual urges against young females, because in his twisted mind, he projected his hate of his mother onto them. He did not act on those urges straight away. He needed to build up courage to do so. He picked up hundreds of girls before he started acting up on those urges, which leads us to the beginning of this story, and to Mary and Anita. After brutally ending the life of pure little Mary, Ed made his way to the trunk of his car, where Anita was hysterically crying. Ed just coldly looked at her and stabbed her as well without a second thought. Monster was finally out of its cage. For the next 11 months, residents of California were terrorized by the man simply known as Co-Ed Killer, as he only targeted young female students. There was never any evidence to be found, only dismembered parts of their bodies with signs of sexual trauma. 6 girls in total have disappeared in this time period, and yet there was no leads. Detectives were completely lost. On the 20th of April, 1973, Ed was suddenly awoken by his mother, who was coming home drunk from a party. In that moment, Ed decided that this was the night where it all ends. He waited until his mother fell asleep and went into a room with a claw hammer, which he used to bludgeon her to death. He beheaded her and did unspeakable things to her head. After he was done, he went to a nearby bar for a drink. His work was done. It was time to wind down and relax, and yet he could not sit still. There was still one more thing he had to do. His mother's best friend, Sally, who was just like his mother. He invited Sally over with a promise of dinner. When she arrived, Ed strangled her to death and wrote a note saying, "Proximate 5:15 a.m. Saturday. No need for her to suffer any more at the hands of this horrible, murderous butcher. It was quick as sleep the way I wanted it. Not sloppy and incomplete, gents. Just a lack of time. I got things to do." With nothing else to do, Ed decided to go on a run. He fled over 1,000 miles away to Colorado. He was constantly on the lookout for cops, as he believed that there was a huge manhunt after him. However, after a while he realized that no one was after him. No one even suspected him. Ed did not care. He was done. He did not want to kill anyone else. His mission was done. And when he realized that no one was after him, he simply decided to turn himself in. But strangely enough, cops wouldn't believe him. How could Gentle Giant, their friend, Big Ed, as they called him, be a killer? It was impossible. Ed could have gotten away with everything if he wanted, but he was tired of this life. He finally felt remorse for what he did and wanted to accept his punishment. He talked for hours with cops and gave them details which only a killer could have known. After that, Ed was promptly arrested. While in custody, Ed tried to commit suicide twice, but was unsuccessful in each attempt. Ed Kemper was sentenced to 7 years to life for each count, with these terms to be served concurrently. As of today, Ed is 75 years old and is still in prison without a possibility of parole.